Awesome. So, welcome, guys, to the second episode of the podcast. And today, the special guest is, surprisingly enough, the same as last time. Fedi Lecamus. Welcome, brother.
Yay, welcome me. By the way, I apologize if there's any background noise. There shouldn't be any. But I've got someone redoing the kitchen. So if there's any noise, that's what it is.
No
But
problem,
yeah, thank you
man.
for having me on again, Horse. Thank you very, very much.
No worries. Yeah, man. For the people who didn't watch the first episode, which I cannot imagine if people do that, can you give a short introduction of who you are, what you do, and yeah, just a bit about that?
Absolutely. So my name is Fedi Lecamus. I work with Muslim entrepreneurs to help them get closer to God, to make more money, and basically just to fix their mindset. And to be honest, that's really it. Like there's no other way for me to really explain it.
Really love that concise description, Feli. And today, the kind of conversation I wanted to have with you, um, to put it like, um, to be transparent, this idea obviously came from you, so not to come up with anything, is about standards. And I think because last time I was kind of looking at the podcast and thought to myself, it was a little bit of a good conversation, don't get me wrong, but maybe there's like something which we can do beforehand to make sure that we actually give the listener a, you could say tangible outcome or a good outcome. So in your own words, Fedi, what would you say if you were listening to this would be a goal you would be happy with to achieve today? So, for example, today we're going to help you, if you're listening, to get more knowledgeable about standards, how to set them, and really not fall prey to lowering your standards, for example. What kind of would you say would be a good goal to aim for today?
So specifically for this, to be honest, my main goal is to help people get a better understanding of themselves. That way, when they're facing some level of hardship or they're facing something that is difficult, they don't go to someone else to find the solution. They go
Mm-hmm.
to themselves to find the solution, which gives you a lot more confidence because a lot of the time, if you keep going back to someone else and it ends up not working, then you don't question them. You just question you. And then if you can't have confidence in them and you can't have confidence in yourself for your decision making, it makes it a lot more difficult. So for me, hopefully by the end of this podcast, the person listening will actually be able to understand how to deal with hardships, how to become more disciplined their own way, like how to actually do it their own way that works for them.
I really like that answer because I think oftentimes people, and I see this in myself, when you are trying to learn certain topics, in the beginning, you're looking for something which is going to magically improve your business or life in some way or another. But you will be amazed if you realize that there's so many different ways in which people succeed. Rarely is there ever like a
Absolutely.
couple of things which people need to have in order to like succeed. Without it, it's not possible, what I mean. Um, so yeah, man, that's a really good point. But before we get into the conversation, for the people who might not know what we actually mean with like the standards specifically, could you give a bit of like you could say a definition of what are standards actually? What do they mean?
Of course. So I'll go back to this Iman Gaji quote that I thought was the best quote I've ever heard in my
Uh,
life, right? We don't race to our highest standards. Sorry, we don't race to our highest dreams. We drop to our lowest standards. So an example of that would be if you want really white teeth, right? Your standard could be that you brush once a day. However, let's say you didn't brush for 2 days, that is your lowest standard. And if you're aiming to brush twice a day, but you keep dropping back to only brushing once every 2 days, let's say, that's because that's your standard. You've defined that as your standard and you've allowed that to become your standard. I'll give another tangible example is let's say you know you need to work 5 hours a day, but you always
mhm.
only work one. Well, you've set one as your standard. That's why you keep dropping back to it because mentally, that's what you accept. And it's more so about what you accept in terms of your output or your input, what you accept in terms of your no, sorry, yeah, your output. What you accept in terms of your output, and that becomes your standard. It's whatever you accept of yourself.
Got it. I would agree. I don't think there's much you could say what people can think about differently when they think about standards, because in kind of the simplest explanation is what you're willing to tolerate. So what you're willing to accept. Anything below that, you just won't do. So like Freddy said, for example, with brushing your teeth, I imagine that anyone who's listening to this wouldn't go without brushing their teeth for at least like a week, I would say. Maybe there's some people who do almost come close to that. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. And Fedi, why do you think it's important for us to actually cover this topic? Because I mean, there's so many different things to discuss. In my opinion, this is not talked about a lot. So why do you think this is so important?
Because, like I said, the you end up dropping back to your standards. So you're going to be the average of the activities that you do. You're going to be the average of the thoughts that you think. You're going to be the average of the actions that you take, the average of the people you spend time with. It's all about your average. It's not about like the best version of you. And your average gets to be decided by your standards. If you can't dictate your own standards, then you end up just having a really crappy average, basically. Or one week you do really, really well and you're really proud of yourself because for this week I was really productive. But then the next 3 weeks of the month, you end up not doing that great. And then you end up disliking yourself. I'd go as far as saying you end up hating yourself. So this topic is more so about how to be continuous, how to build momentum without dropping, basically how to define it for you. Because a lot of people will define their own standards. And then you'll try and use their standards.
Hmm.
Some of you in the agency space, you've probably heard Charlie Morgan say that he used to work 12 hours a day. And you might be thinking, oh crap, I need to work 12 hours a day. But you never set that standard. You've never even defined what that standard is for. That was just Charlie Morgan's standard. So it's to give yourself kind of that freedom to actually achieve what you want to achieve because living by other people's standards, it's not going to help you get to where you want to be, really.
No, I really agree with that. Because like I think this conversation is very interesting because of the way in which we behave. Because I think like 90% or 95% of all behavior that you have on a daily basis is like subconscious, so fully automatic. And even if you think you're acting consciously, if you really, really dig deep, you probably find that it's still like an automatic process. Because like, for example, if you're doing some work, you're researching some videos or whatever tweets, then you still find yourself, for example, typing without even being aware that you're typing, or like you suddenly get distracted by something. So the reason I think why these standards are so important is because of these things which are subconscious standards. Brushing your teeth is so subconscious, but it doesn't mean that if you are aware that, or sorry, if you aren't aware that you brush your teeth, that then you're gonna brush it less than if you were. So that's like the first thing I wanted to point out. I think the reason it's so important to work on your standards is because if you don't, you're always going to fall back to your lowest standards because they are so automatic. So you have to change them in some way. But to
Exactly,
go a little bit
exactly.
back to that, Freddy, do you maybe have an example of a time in you could say your online business journey when you did actually realize standards were they really important? So when was that sort of pivoting moment?
I think for me, the pivoting moment was when I moved back. So I used to live with my dad in France. That's when I started my agency. And then I moved back here, which is where my parents, where my mum lives, sorry, with my brother. And then also I moved out like a year ago, basically. And,
Hmm.
I go back and forth. But the point is, when I moved back here, when my environment changed, I realized when there's a change, it's all about your standards. Some people that I know, when they're traveling, right? If they forgot their toothbrush, if they did anything like that, they go out and buy a toothbrush. Just being honest here, I don't. I'll just use my fingers and clean with like some toothpaste. Or I usually
Really?
bring like this carry-on thing with me, which is like a bit like a toothpick
Yeah.
to clean out everything. But I know some people that just go out and buy everything again. I don't, because I know for me, it's just one day. But for my friends in this case, just one day for them, regardless of the environment, means about maintaining standards. So in my entrepreneurial journey, the example I can give was I used to do loads and loads of outreach when I was in France, but then when I moved here, I didn't maintain that standard. Like I literally stopped doing outreach for like 3 weeks. I don't even know why. But clearly when you reflect on it, it's because unconsciously my standard was never set. And really quickly, actually, Horst, I think you can explain this really well. What would you say the first step of setting a standard is? Is it like a conscious decision? What is the first step of setting a standard?
Very good question. In my opinion, you should only look for the standards that you're trying to change, because if you're trying to change too much at once, that's gonna go wrong. Because you obviously don't have so much focus and energy to spend in a day. The first thing you should look at is the current biggest problem in your life. And that depends on the current goal you have. So this is probably a story for another day, but people should first get very clear on the actual goal they're trying to achieve. Because most of the time, people are working on stuff that doesn't even lead them closer to their goal. So let's say if you're trying to set standards for, I don't know, a certain type of task in your work. So for example, something to do with the agency space. I don't know, like building a website is such a trivial example. But if you're trying to set standards for maintaining your website, you want to spend at least 1 hour a day maintaining your website. This is a very absurd example. It's not going to matter as much because it's not going to directly lead you closer to your goal. So first of all, make sure you get very clear on your goal. Second of all, make sure you get very clear on the current biggest problem that you have that's preventing you from reaching that goal, which is usually, if you just do that, a lot of the problems will be fixed. But then you can start to see about what is the standard that you really got to work on next. So let me see if I can come up with a really quick example. If your goal is, for example, to get to 10K a month, and the current problem you have is that you don't have enough meetings or you don't have enough prospects, then you have to identify the biggest problem that leads to you not having enough prospects. Let's say that that's, for example, because you're not doing the work. That means the first standard you should set is to do with actually doing the work. So my process for identifying kind of what standard you should work on would be to look at the goal, the current problem you have, and then look at the standard that's preventing you from solving that problem. Would you say that's
Gotcha.
good, or do you have like any additions to that?
100%, 100%. I think I agree with you in that the first thing anyone should do is define what their goal is. If you don't have a defined goal, you have no direction in life. Like it's very hard to decide what to do next if you don't know what to do next in the first place. Like your what is going to be the biggest like factor in regards to actually having peace of mind, actually knowing what steps to take, etc., etc. Yeah, I mean, I really like the point you made about solving it backwards, like looking at what your goal is, then looking at what problem is holding you back, and then the solution to that problem being the standard. So, how would you say for you, Horst, if you have any examples of like standards, whether they're in your personal life or for your business, what standards you've had to set recently based on problems that you've faced recently?
Very good question. Okay, so I would say the current biggest problem I had right now, it's already kind of being solved, but it was to do with getting more leads, because I was working quite a bit on content, was working on a few lead magnets, but the kind of main problem I had was, first of all, some of the lead magnets weren't really effective, and I wasn't getting as much leads as I liked to. Then I kind of looked at my behavior and the actions I was taking, and I was doing a few things in order to solve that problem. I was trying to get people to sign up for my email list, which I did through producing content and through launching lead magnets, both of them which I already did. However, there was another third thing which I didn't do, so you could say my standard didn't really exist because I didn't do it. And that was basically just reaching out to people who engage with my stuff, because it's also a bit of an inbound conversation that way. So once I started doing that, I guess after like 2 or 3 days, I already had 3 people who wanted to work with me, which is crazy because just because I did this action, just because you could say the standard I now have in order to get leads is obviously to do this inbound messaging thing as well. It's not just to do the lead magnets and the content, but now I've added this one on top. And I know that if I stop getting leads, that my standard is not going to drop below this, because I know what has to happen in order to get leads, which is the sort of inbound messaging thing, if that makes sense. So I would say for me, it's currently, I don't know if it's really that good of an example, just because sending messages was something which I didn't do before, but now I do it. So I guess you could say it is, because now it's become a standard. What do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, no, I think you make a very good point. I mean, what I'm thinking is like when it comes to maintaining standards, the main thing is realize that it's bloody necessary. Like this is necessary for you to do. You can't just do something, have it fix your solution, then stop doing it and expect the solution to still stay there. Like the only reason that's the solution in the first place was because you did it. So for a lot of people, when they're like, "Oh, but Fedi, like, I haven't been getting clients, I haven't been doing this." Like, well, have you been doing the work? No. Well, there you go. That's the first problem you have to solve. So standards, we've spoken about that. We've spoken how to decide what your standards are, which is you look at the problem, you look at what the solution is, and then you look to implement that solution into your routine or into your life. Also, I'm really curious because I have a couple stories about this, like maintaining standards, how to keep them up for a very long time. What have you found helps you to solidify, like make sure that that standard stays in place, regardless of whether or not you change environment, regardless of whether or not your priority changes in the business or in your personal life? How do you maintain that standard?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Uh, I guess I guess you have to get really clear with yourself on why it's important to you. Because at the end of the day, it's all about priorities. If you look at why people break standards, it's just because of their priorities. Because if their true priority was making the business work versus feeling comfortable, then they would pick the option which is doing the work. But because their priority, and this is not something they set consciously most of the time, this is something which happens automatically, they give into it, which means subconsciously they have given the priority to feeling comfortable or like not facing the work. So getting really clear on what it is that your utmost priority is, in my opinion, is the most important thing. The second thing is just catching yourself. Because to be fair, I think you can do whatever you want. You can like write on a fancy piece of paper that you're going to do new standards. You can do all these types of stuff. But at the end of the day, we're pretty, you could say, weak human beings. We need to learn by a lot of repetition. And in order to actually make that happen, you need to be very aware of what you're doing. So I guess that really the first step is just trying to see what standards you want to actually set. And next, you just have to be really aware when it happens. Because let's say, for example, with something to do with diet, if you have a specific standard for that, if you're close to, let's say, a restaurant with burgers and you're extremely hungry, at some point, if you're not aware enough, your brain is going to almost trick you into going into the restaurant and, for example, ordering a burger. But if you are aware of that, and if you know that your mind is trying to do that because it craves easy dopamine, then it's much easier for you to say, no, I know what my standard is, and I'm going to not do that. So I guess awareness plays a big role in this too. Do you maybe have an example for me, Fedi, about um, a standard in your life which you have been able to level up, if that makes sense, to raise?
Yeah, so for example, this is a really easy example I think everyone can relate to. I used to go to the gym 4 times a week. I'd never actually been to the gym more than 4 times a week. And then in like November of last year, I was like, do you know what? I want to get bigger. I want to get fitter because I want to start fighting in September of this year. So I was like, do you know what? My goal, I've looked at what problem I'm facing. I looked at the solution, just like me and Horse have been like talking about. And then what I said, Horse, to myself, I was like, okay, clearly from everything I've seen, I either have to be training every day or 6 times a week. That's a completely new standard for me. I'm used to training 4 times a week. I'm used to doing upper, lower as my split. And then I've done 5 times a week for some weeks, but I've never really pushed to six. So for me to set that new standard, I think awareness is probably the biggest thing you have to be is you when you tell yourself clearly, this is what I'm aiming to do. When you're about to not do it, is when you need to catch yourself and remind yourself, regardless of anything else, any other circumstance, I have to go do this workout. For me, today, my gym closes at 7. So what am I going to do? I have a coaching call that finishes at 7. I'm going to walk into the city center. I'm going to pay for another gym and I'm going to go today regardless because it's a standard. Like you have to imagine if you dip below this standard, that the whole world is going to break or like the whole world is just going to be destroyed. The world isn't going to be destroyed, but your world definitely will be. And if you can't keep the word to yourself, if you can't maintain your own standards, then nobody else will ever maintain their standards around you. That's for me, that's the biggest thing. It's like thinking about like a longer term, like with my children, with my wife, with like my family, with my business partners, etc., etc. If I can't maintain my own standards, then I can't hold people accountable for them slipping their own standards. I know I've said like a lot there, but it's just like if you're gonna introduce a new standard, make sure it's justified by a goal. Like the goal has to change. If let's say you've broken down like, oh, okay, I need to do 50 cold calls a day, and I'll get to 10K a month at the end of the year if I just do 50 cold calls a day. If your goal is to make 10K per month at the end of the year, don't change it to 100 cold calls a day. There is literally like your brain won't be justified to do it. But if your goal is to then do it in 6 months, then that doubling of your output is justified. I'd say, first of all, justify why you're changing your what's it called, your standard. And secondly, if you're actually going to upgrade a standard, the main thing you need to do is become fully aware of those voices or those weak points that you have when you're about to destroy that standard. Like for me, with brushing my teeth, and I'm coming close to the mic so nobody else hears me. When it comes to brushing my teeth, right? Sometimes whenever I'm like really, really sleepy and I forgot to, the voice in my head will be like, it's no biggie, you can do it in the morning. Then I have to remind myself, like, it doesn't matter, like, whatever excuse, whatever rationality my brain creates, it doesn't matter. Once you've set a standard, you have to maintain it regardless. Because your future wife will not brush her teeth before bed. You will go in to kiss her, and her breath will stink. And you'll think to yourself, why did she do that? So why would you do that to yourself as well? Like, why would you, even if there's nobody and you're sleeping in your bed alone and you're sleeping next to the 48 Laws of Power, which is what I do. I just have the book I'm reading next to me in bed, so I'm just cuddling it. But my point is that once you've justified why you have a new standard, why you have a new goal, like Horse said, become fully aware of it. I think the way you said that, Horse, was amazing. Like, if you can become aware of it, you can tackle it quickly. And for me, it's like detaching yourself from the decision. Like, the decision isn't made by you anymore. Does that make sense? Like, you don't make the decision anymore. The decision is made when you wrote it on that piece of paper. Every action then has to be taken. There's no more, oh yeah, but this excuse, oh yeah, but that excuse. It's just done. It gets done. That's it. I think that comes into discipline a bit. So I'm curious what you think about that, Horse. Where do you think like discipline comes into the equation? How do we look at standards of, like, because I've heard this quite a lot of people being dissatisfied. Like, you can never be satisfied with your standards. How do you always push them up? That's all we were like. We always hear about that online, don't we? Like, pushing up your standards. If you're going to be disciplined, you've got to push it to the roof. What do you think about that, brother?
Really good question. I think I have two things to say about that. First, I will answer your thing about kind of raising the standards continuously. In my experience, some standards you cannot keep raising indefinitely. So if, for example, with working hours, obviously you can't increase them till you don't have any time left for sleep anymore. And what I found myself is I got very attached to my standards when I think about 1.5 years ago, when I was pretty deep into my agency. And the problem I faced, which I don't think is common, but it definitely happens, instead of having trouble doing the work, I had trouble knowing when to give up certain things. So I had trouble knowing when to give myself a day off, when to go a little bit less hard in the gym. Because what happened was I was so attached to hitting reps, to you could say effort and pushing. Sometimes I completely didn't pay attention to my form. So I ended up going really hard. And like, if you're looking at it in a rational sense, I didn't grow much muscle from that. I would be much better off just doing 2 reps, but full intention, maybe core, if that makes sense. By the way, I don't know if my microphone has changed, probably has.
Yeah, your microphone has changed.
Awesome. Bit of technical difficulties here. Let me just reinsert it really quick. Should be a second.
Perfect. There you go.
Sorry. Anyway, the kind of problem I had was more so knowing when to be flexible. Because you gotta know, as an entrepreneur, what I learned is it's not just about knowing when you should be disciplined, about knowing when you should not compromise, about when you should not give in. It's knowing when you should give in. If I didn't master this lesson, I probably would still have ran my med spa agency at very little profit margins, because at the end when I ran it, I think I was almost at a loss just because of the amount of costs I had, because I wanted to keep pushing. It's like the sunk cost fallacy. You have invested so much time, effort, money into something that you keep doing it, which leads to you being very stupid. But that aside, I think that you should have standards, but don't see them as, if this doesn't happen, like, I don't know, I'm gonna die or something. Because what happens undoubtedly is there might come a moment that something happens where you're not able to put up with your standard. So for example, Fedi, let's say right now you're planning on going to another gym. Let's say that something happens with your family members, hopefully this doesn't, and you have to go to the hospital with them. Then you have just missed your gym session. What kind of reaction this can occur is that you start feeling guilty because you're like, oh, I didn't hit the standard. No, I'm a failure. Oh my God, I cannot even explain the damage that that kind of mindset is going to do versus skipping one workout. You cannot even imagine the kind of negative
100%.
identity feedback loop which is started because you start feeling guilty, because you start seeing yourself as a failure, is much bigger than if you just skip one gym session, than if you just eat one burger, than if you just work a little bit less. That's what I realized, at least in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's
I
crazy.
think you make a good point. I think you know this as well, Horst. You might have seen me do this. I get all my students to do it. I call it the value galaxy. Like if you imagine you have a hierarchy of values, if your top priority is always family, let's say on your values, then anything below that gets sacrificed to family, right? So if let's say you sacrifice the gym, you sacrifice eating well because your mum cooked a cake, she baked a cake and she baked a really tasty cake. She was like, I want you to have some of it. And you're like, fine, mum. You value family above everything else. Therefore, you won't feel guilty when sacrificing the other things. What people lack is this value hierarchy that they can then differentiate and give it context. Like, is family the top priority for everything? Probably not. Like, this is a really weird example, right? But if your wife ended up cheating on you, what would you prioritize? The family? No, you'd probably prioritize the children themselves, right? Making sure they're okay. So I guess to a certain degree, yeah, family would still be a priority. But then within that context, there's a different hierarchy. I imagine the highest thing would be children, and then next, it would probably be your mental health. So within each context, you have to give yourself a value hierarchy. And this sounds like it's going to take ages, right? It's something you have to be in retrospection for like 5 years to understand your values. Literally, take 5 minutes to list out your favorite things about life, the people that you love, the things that you love doing. And within that, you'll find it's either going to be in the scope of family and relationships, it's either going to be in the scope of self-development and yourself, in the scope of academia and like knowledge, and probably in the scope of health. Like those four things are going to basically dictate your values. And these are called the value galaxies. So after you've written everything that you love in 5 minutes, you'll realize, oh, I love way more things about family than I do about my physical health. Guess what? When your mum's at the hospital, you don't just think to yourself, nah, bro, I'm going to the gym, yeah. Like, there's no point, yeah. Like, don't be an idiot. You clearly value something else, and that's okay. Like, you can value something else more. Like, me with entrepreneurship, I value certain values of, like, let's say modesty, for example, over getting more views. So most likely in my thumbnails, there won't be any photos of me topless, right? I might change my mind by the time someone is watching this, but I'm just saying, okay? Because I value
I want
modesty.
to see it.
And when you value something, and I think unconsciously you do this very, very well, Horse. It's like when you value something, you have to place that thing above your quote unquote standard that now you've set. So your values always go like they're always first. And unconsciously, you actually do this automatically. But to save yourself from the guilt that you've just described, Horse, I think the best thing to do is remember what you actually value. Like loads of people, oh, this is my favorite equation ever. Outcome over ego. What is the outcome that you desire? And what does your ego want you to do? And what you have to do is prioritize the outcome itself. I think this is from The Power of Now, right? It's my favorite equation to have ever existed. Outcome over ego. What is the outcome that you want over what does your ego want to do? My ego wants to go to sleep, but I want pearly white teeth, so I should probably brush my teeth.
I really like that, man. And I think also a point to add on to this is that people make it way too hard for themselves. They think that they have to relentlessly up their standards, and then that is going to fix their entire problems of life. But if you do that too soon, too quickly, either you're going to burn out because you have to keep track of all of these standards, or it's just not going to work. You're going to fail, and then you're going to build this failure identity mindset. So what I would suggest anyone who's trying to build new standards is make it easy for yourself. Like Fedi said, define your value hierarchy. just to make sure you actually know what you prioritize. And then just do it first thing in the day. That's the easiest you're going to make it for yourself. So if you really honestly prioritize your health over your work, there's nothing wrong with that. But then you have to design your life in a way in which it makes it easy for you to prioritize your health. Because if there is going to be a scenario, for example, with Fedi, where he has to squeeze in his gym time and he's not certain, like if he's gonna do a workout at the other gym, then if there's something which might conflict with that, he's gonna have to make a very, you could say, tricky decision, obviously. But if that was like the first thing which he did in the day, he could probably swap like 3 or 4 things after that to still be able to do his workout. So I think that's maybe a good point to add on as well. Start with maybe 1 or 2 things, lock those in, do those first thing in the day. Then you also prove to yourself that you can actually do it. And later, once that has become sort of a habit, because in my opinion, standards are really just habits, but then mentally. So you kind of mentally go into the habit of deciding something is your priority. Yeah, I think that's just a really important point as well. Do you maybe have some, you could say, strategies or techniques, Feli, that you have used or taught your clients on how to actually form these standards?
Yeah, do a tenth of what you said you were going to do. So start off by
Mm.
doing 10% of what you said you were going to do. I'll give you two examples also. Let's say you want to wake up at 5 a.m. So start waking up at 7. Start waking up at 8 a.m. And then every time decrease that time by 10 minutes. So let's say you want to wake up at 5 a.m., but you're currently waking up at 9 a.m. Do you imagine how hard it is for your body to shift 4 hours? Like you can do it when you're feeling really motivated. You can do it when you're feeling really good. Maybe use a strategy that I do, which is I put my phone in like one of my drawers so it like vibrates really loudly in the night and I have to wake up and turn it off. But most of the time, you'll probably just end up going back to bed and going back to sleep. What you want to do is start off, let's say you're currently waking up at 9 a.m. Dude, wake up at 8:50 for 3 days. Then wake up at 8:30 for a whole week or two. Then wake up at 8 for a month. Then wake up at 7:30 for 2 weeks. And then wake up at 7 for like X amount of time. Like I'm giving examples of random times, but make it longer than 5 days, right? Like try and set a new standard every 5 days. Because what you're doing there is proving to yourself as you said, horse, is like saying you can do it, and you've got proof. Like, oh, I went from waking up at 9 a.m. to waking up at 7:30. Some of you guys will be like, yeah, but my favorite influencer wakes up at 5. Yeah, cool. Like, you're not your favorite influencer though, and that's okay. You don't have to be just yet. You will be. You'll be better than them, God willing, right? But for now, just improve on what you have. And this 10% rule is, for example, if someone tells you do 100 cold calls a day, if you've never done cold calls in your life, just start off with doing 10. Just do 10 a day and be satisfied with that. Like the only reason you won't be satisfied is because you'll see the other person who's doing 100, you'll see the life that they're living, and you'll put yourself next to their life and think to yourself, they're better than me because of their life being like this. No human being is better than any other human being. Like you have to let go of that notion. This person is making more money than me, therefore he's more attractive, therefore he's gonna like be happier, etc., etc., etc. No, like that's a terrible way of comparing. Do 10%, and then over a period of, I'd say probably, to be honest, I'd probably say like 3 months or so. You might disagree with me here, but I'd say over a period of 3 months, scale it to that end goal. Over a period of 3 months, scale to 100 cold calls a day. And then when you want to jump from 100 to 150, you'll be like, oh, this is so easy because you've now set the new standard of 100 because you've slowly worked up. So I call it the rule of 10%, which is you just start off by doing 10%.
I do like that very much, and I do agree. Not necessarily because I think it is going to give you like, well, not necessarily because of the volume, but because of the effect that it has on the way people are going to do the task. So what I mean is, if you have 3 months to scale to 100 cold calls a day, or you have to scale in 3 months to sending like, or to creating like one thread a day to make it relevant for some ex-creators as well. If you start out with a low volume, naturally you're going to have a lot of energy left in order to, because you start out with a low volume. What that does is it actually forces you to think, how can you make this the best you can possibly make it? Because what I ended up doing myself is I started focusing on the volume instead of the quality. Don't get me wrong, it's not the one or the other. You can definitely find a middle ground. But in my opinion, it's definitely better to focus more on the quality side. It's better to focus on making 5 cold calls, making sure that you do them with a lot of conviction, than making 100 cold calls, sounding like a scared teenage boy who's just playing Call of Duty all day and then you don't get any meetings. Because at the end of the day, you're doing the cold calls to get the meetings. You're not doing the cold calls to do the cold calls. And I think this is a very important lesson for everybody listening, is the reason that you want to start out slow is not just because you want to keep consistent with it, but also because you want to learn how to perform the certain task in the best possible way. Because the thing many people don't understand about scale is that you cannot scale what doesn't work. So if you have
Mhm.
one cold call, or like, sorry, you have 10 cold calls, but all of them suck, if you do 100, 100 of them are going to suck. Probably not a good example because it's a very low sample size. But for example, if you create 35 tweets, like short form tweets, all of them are terrible. You're better off creating 5, doing really, like trying really hard, and then maybe having a little bit more on the quality side, because then, for example, you have a system which allows you to create good quality shorts, and then you can start increasing the shorts. Then you can start creating 50 instead of focusing on volume first, just because people say do a lot of work, do a lot of hard work, because then you're gonna do a lot of hard work, but you're not gonna get anywhere with it.
Also, a little spoiler alert is the people that tell you to do a lot of hard work didn't start off by doing a lot of hard work. And they like the lot of hard work comes in the middle of your journey in entrepreneurship. Like, I don't know if you agree with this, Huss, but like the start of your journey is probably just learning. Like, you're just learning a skill, you're trying to develop some confidence. And then in the middle is when you're actually doing all the hard work. And then at the end, once you're starting to get that freedom, you're just not doing as much hard work because you just don't need to. You generally just don't need to. Um, to be honest, I was going to quickly say, this reminds me of my maths teacher, absolute legend, right? Mr. McKenna. Nobody will know who he is because I didn't say his first name, but Mr. McKenna, absolute legend. He told me, Fedi, if you were to do 10 practice questions of maths a day and you were to practice them wrong, you would literally cause yourself to get worse grades than if you did 0 practice questions. What he was basically telling me is develop the skill learning super foundational maths, like I was doing like a level, so 16, 17, 18 year olds, I don't know what that would be like, integrations, differentiation, all that jazz, like calculus, etc., etc. But he basically told me start off with a foundation, practice the really easy questions, and make sure you get the easy questions right, and then move on to the next questions, then move on to the next questions, and then, and only then, will you do like the big, bulky, like we call them past paper questions, like exam questions. Like I used to do like 30, 40 a day for like 3 hours. And the only reason I started doing that, which is the middle of my journey in improving my maths, was after learning the foundations, after practicing the quality. Because like horse, like you said, brother, if you were to practice something wrong, you get in the habit of doing that wrong thing because you've done it so many times. You've done 100 cold calls of you saying, "Hey, is this John?" You're not supposed to ask if it's the person picking up. Or like you write loads of content. Let's say you write a tweet and you forget to put like, let's say you forget to put like any punctuation. Now you're just in the habit of having no punctuation in your tweet, and it just looks ridiculous, right? But for you to undo that, it's going to take you longer than if you just were patient at the start and you just took your time to actually make a good quality tweet. By the way, as a spoiler alert for everyone as well, the algorithm isn't going to think it's good quality. That's why you practice foundations, because foundations are shared between everyone. The algorithm might not think it's a good tweet, but if everyone else like agrees that this is like the law of copywriting, let's say, like if this is the number one law, it's to, let's say, channel a basic human desire. If you just practice your tweets, channeling someone's desire, let's say, for a partner, and you just kept making tweets about people wanting partners, then you've just practiced a valuable skill. The algorithm might not think so. Like the algorithm probably won't pick up on it. But you know from your lessons or from the thing that you read, from the book that you read, from the video that you watched, that this is the foundation. Practice the foundation, and then you can scale with volume, and then the skill becomes effective. And then I think like anything in entrepreneurship, it's a bit like a bell curve, right? At the start, you're not doing much and you're just learning, and then you end up doing loads and loads and loads, and then you end up getting the reward of doing loads of work, and you can kind of live the life that you want to live. That could be 5 years, that could be 10 years, that could be 2 years. It depends per person. But I think 100% you're right, brother. Like if you're practicing the skill wrong, you're just building a bad skill. Like instead of developing a good skill, you're just practicing a really bad skill. That's why I tell people, like, as soon as you start learning a new skill, get someone to teach it to you. Just straight away, get someone to teach you who's ahead of you. They could be one level ahead of you. Get them to teach it to you because you need to level up that skill quickly by making sure you know what not to do so you don't pick up the bad habits more than you know what to do.
I think that's a really good point, man. Because if we quickly bring this back to standards, I think the real standards that people should focus on in the beginning doesn't even necessarily have to do anything with working so much a day, doing so many workouts. I think your real standards in the beginning have to do with always staying true to your values. That should be a standard because then it's going to help you with other standards later. And for example, as we discussed, if you make your standard to always produce quality pieces or to always do quality reps, none of the other stuff is going to matter as much. To be fair, I changed quite a lot in this. I would much rather sacrifice working time, my diet, my fitness. I would sacrifice all of those things just if I focused on doing a few things very right. So if I, for example, I don't feel as well when working out, I feel a little bit, you could say, sore. I might just focus on doing 5 to 10 reps of an exercise, maybe 1 to 2 sets. But if I do them really well and I really focus hard on doing the exercise well, I brace my core, or I eat just a little bit but very well, or I work, let's say, 1 hour a day, but I focus really hard on making it a really valuable piece, I'm completely fine with that. Because at the end of the day, if you focus too much on the amount of times that you're working or the amount of reps that you do, all that you're doing is pretty much satisfying your ego, which is just proving other people that you're worth something. Because that's usually what people get so attached to numbers for, because they want to prove other people something. So yeah, and I think that's a really good point you made. And as a kind of, you could say, wrap around, if people right now who are listening to this um, are developing
Big if.
standards. Yeah, yeah, big if, because I don't know, one, if people are still listening, two, if the people are actually going to take action. But let's say that they do, and if you're still listening, then you're definitely one of the few people who will succeed, because you're now going to get the real gems. Is what would you say the advice would be from you to people who are developing their standards and want to know kind of when is the point they can let go of focusing on specific standards and start raising it? Because obviously, one point is like setting a standard, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you go to the gym for a week 6 times once that is a standard. So what would you say is the point where you can start looking to maybe increase it? Doesn't have to.
I'm gonna give three things you have to check off. Number one, which is probably the most important one, has my goal changed? Like, have I achieved my goal? If you set a standard and let's say it only took you a week to gain 10 kilograms of muscle, which by the way is completely impossible, but let's just hypothetically say it was. If you reach that, then your next goal is to build another 10. Maybe you have to do something different, or maybe you have to do the same thing. Standards are set by goals. And secondly, it's when you stop thinking about doing it and you just start incorporating it in your day without realizing. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say it's 5 o'clock and you usually work out at 7 p.m. If automatically you're thinking, I'm going to go work out in 2 hours, that's a good sign that you've probably set the standard in place, like the standard is in stone. So it's when it becomes a proper habit that you don't have to think about. Basically, just to be honest, it's just when it becomes a good habit, like a stable, well stabilized, well implemented habit. And then lastly, which I think not many people talk about, is when you are actually happy with the standard. Like if you're actually happy with what you're doing, then move it up. If you're still unhappy, like people say it's the opposite. Well, no, because surely I need to up my standards if I'm unhappy. Dude, upping the thing you do more is just gonna make you more unhappy. Like if you don't enjoy working out 6 times a week, most likely you're not gonna enjoy working out every day. If you don't enjoy writing 2 pieces of content a day, you're most likely not going to enjoy writing four. Like there's so much to that. Like yeah, there's too much I can go into on that, but just you have to actually be satisfied with it to then upgrade. For me, with standards, it's actually the opposite. People say you have to be dissatisfied. I think it's the opposite. You have to be satisfied with your current standard to then be like, do you know what? I want to do more of this. I want to do more of that. And again, that can be because your goal changed. That can be because, what did I say for the second one? Was crap, I forgot.
Because the habit, right? So it becomes so
Yeah, because it
automatic.
becomes, yeah, yeah. Thank you, brother. Because it becomes a habit. Do you know what? I'll be honest with you. This happens to me all the time in YouTube videos. I have to pause my recording, rewatch what I said, and then make a new clip.
No way.
Second, you have to make it a habit. And then thirdly, is when you're actually satisfied with the current standard that you've set and you're happy to do more of it. Like if you hate brushing your teeth, don't brush your teeth 3 times a day. Just stick to two, stick to one. Um, Same with like eating more meat. Like for me, I didn't enjoy eating meat at the amount of I was eating. I'm not just going to eat more. My goal hasn't changed. It's become a habit, so that's one of them ticked off. But I'm not happy eating more meat, so I just don't eat more meat than I used to. So, yeah.
Wow, I think that's such a great example because kind of the first people who I learned these topics from are Sam Ovens and Charlie Morgan, and they taught it both because Charlie obviously learned a lot from Sam, so they have kind of similar paradigms. Is they both looked at it from the, you could say, negative side of things. So it's like if you break the standard, then I don't know, something's gonna go wrong, or like you could say from the very worst case scenario perspective, which is definitely there's a valid argument to be made because obviously it's a very effective way to motivate yourself using negative emotions. Don't necessarily think it's the right way. I noticed in my life that when I started to become a lot more accepting of certain things, I started to feel better. And because I started to feel better, I started to really almost want to do certain things more. So one example is I never used to work on Sundays. I used to have this standard of Sunday is rest day. No matter how many tasks I have, on Sunday I will not open my emails, I will not open my Slack, I will not check my WhatsApp for clients, I will not do anything. I wouldn't see, I sometimes would still like look at courses and such, but like actual client work or actual outreach, I would never do on Sunday. Then I sort of started in the creative business. Initially, I still had this standard of not working on Sundays. And I kept this up for a long time, and like I'm talking almost 2 years that I haven't worked on Sunday. Then when I went into the creative business, which was a lot more enjoyable to me because I started pursuing my own interest and sharing about it, there was a time when I was writing and I was enjoying it so much that I literally worked the entire day on Sundays too. So now I went from never working on Sundays because I kind of wanted to give myself rest. Also, in itself says that I didn't really like the work because I was kind of looking forward to Sundays as well. But with this kind of some of the tasks I was doing now, I was literally looking forward to doing it. So I even sort of sacrifice my free time, you could say, in order to do the writing because I found it fun. So I think a lot of people might have struggles with discipline and building habits because they think it's such a negative thing. They think it's like you have to push through the pain, blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, you have to do certain things, but in my opinion, it's much better to change your mind first and then change your actions. Because if you do it the other way around, it's never gonna last. I don't know how you think about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a finishing point, it's very important to understand that like the way you think about things is going to dictate the way you do things, but the way you like the thing you think about is going to happen in the first place. Like if you keep thinking, I'm someone who breaks the standards, you are going to break your standards. If you keep thinking, oh my goodness, these standards are impossible, you're going to make these standards impossible. Like the brain rarely likes to be proved wrong. If ever. The brain does not want to be proved wrong. So why are you proving yourself wrong? You're not. You're proving yourself right. Every single day, you're proving yourself right. Whether or not you realize it, you're proving yourself right by doing the thing you said you didn't want to do, or by doing the thing you said you were going to do. So whether or not you derive it from positive or negative. Either way, you thought about it and it happened. That is the most basic law of psychology. Whatever thought we have in our mind will turn into an action because actions come from thoughts. Actions don't just materialize like that. And the most basic actions that we can have are instinctual actions because they're so deep ingrained in our mind that we don't even consciously think about them. So without going too much on a tangent, if I can bring this back to saying standards, it's like people you see with really high standards, a lot of them are actually very dissatisfied people. They're successful people. I'm not going to take anything away from them. They're successful people, but they're dissatisfied. Do you genuinely want to sacrifice your satisfaction, potential happiness, your your longevity in terms of your mental health, your physical health, etc.? Would you actually want to sacrifice that for wealth or for the success that you think is kind of like the be all end all? If you would, then I personally think you're living vicariously through these people that have told you and set their own standards onto you. The best way for you to ever find success is for you to have your own definition of success, to have your own definition of standards, and then to live by those. Because guess who's winning in that race? You. There is no other competitor in that race. So what that means is that the thoughts that you have don't come from other people, so you can't just compare yourself to others. And secondly, it means the standards that you've set are set by you, which means you're the master, not Hamza, not Charlie Morgan, not Sam Ovens, not Alex Hormozy. You're the own master of your standards. And then you're also the own master of your destiny because you've decided what success is for you. Is success for you living on a farm, making, let's say, $5,000 a month, being able to support your family? Because you know that if you're going to be making $20,000 a month, you might have to be working more, or you might be at a job you hate. Or maybe being an entrepreneur for you is just about having a project that you are happy with. Dude, why are you in a business that you hate? Why are you living on another man's standard if it's not even your own definition of success? That's honestly because I don't want to go on a tangent on this, but most people don't even define their own success. They watch a video on entrepreneurship at the age of 15 years old. They look at this man's success. They want to base their own success on this man's level of success or on this man's definition of success. They live the next 10 years of their life, potentially becoming very successful, but never actually being satisfied. Because all you're doing there is being a glorified worker. Except instead of working for a corporation, what you've done is just worked another man's dream. I hope that makes sense, but all you've done is just live as a slave, just in a different way. And the best thing you can do is think independently. What is your success? Because we judge people that we see in like who aren't entrepreneurs. Dude, I don't care if this guy's making $2,000 a month, working in a restaurant he hates. If he gets to go home and spend time with his family, let's say, and he has time with his children because the shifts are night shifts and he likes to spend at least 4 hours in the morning with his daughters, if that dude will look in his life and he's 80 years old on his deathbed and think, do you know what? I had a successful life. That's it. He's more a free man than any entrepreneur who's making $1 million a month. Way more of a free man. So yeah, anyways, I don't want to go on a tangent about this. This is going on a completely different topic. But I've even lost a way to remake that about standards. Set your own standards is what I'd say. Set your own standards.
Well, I think that's brilliant. And we're definitely gonna do another episode about this because I already wrote it down. Because yes, I think as a final wrap up, really start to think for yourself, first of all, what you would like your standards to be, not anyone else. And secondly, how you would go about doing it. Because Fedi and I obviously give you our opinions. We say it might be a good idea to, for example, use the 10% rule. Might be a good idea to start looking at how you feel. But if you don't value that, it's completely fine. So yeah, man, that's honestly spot on. We're definitely going to do another episode of this. I want to thank you very much, Fedi, for coming on today. As a final wrap up, where can people perhaps learn more about you if they would like to check you out after this?
Just YouTube, Fedi Lecamus. Fedi Lecamus on YouTube. That's it.
Got it. Got it. I will surely plug some of the socials you have in the description. Thank you so much for coming on today, man. Really enjoyed today's episode and looking forward to speaking with another guest. Perhaps you again in the next one.
Way. Thank you for
Awesome.
having me, Horse.